Hello, everybody. So I hope I'm audible. Is it also sound and everything fine? And I can begin.
Yeah, fine.
All right. Okay.
Yes,
All
I'm all
right.
good.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So we have heard, seen, spoken of, commented, and maybe even experienced domestic violence. Nobody is oblivious to the term. However, it may have a different meaning and impact for different people. So, quoting Sara Papatello, the effects of abuse are devastating and far reaching. Domestic violence speaks many languages and has many colors and lives in many different communities. WHO, that's the World Health Organization, on various occasions brought to the forefront various statistics on domestic violence. The most common yet startling one is that 1 in 3 women globally experience domestic violence sometime in their lifetime. So if you are under the impression that these things only happen in a certain strata or section of society, that myth should be busted, even if you're sporadically following news or cases reported in the public domain. Over a period of years, many organizations, NGOs, etc., globally have vociferously campaigned against domestic violence. However, it seems that in spite of these efforts, across nations, perpetrators of violence or abuse have somehow missed the point. During the exceedingly trying time of the COVID-19 lockdown, cases of domestic violence have doubled in India as per recent statistics by the NCW. They've also gone up threefold in some other developing nations, and these are just the reported ones. Few news reports also showed that people indulging in domestic abuse or intimate partner abuse have used stress, agony, helplessness, job loss, even less work frustrations as excuses and even justifications for this form of abuse. Sure, these can be exacerbating factors, but the more important question is, should it be an okay thing or even a justification for abusing or being violent with your partner? My name is Sana Hakim. I'm a litigation lawyer practicing in family and gender-based criminal law. I'm also a partner at Posh at Work, who has organized this panel discussion. Posh at Work is an organization empaneled by the Ministry of Women and Child, Government of India, and we assist organizations across sectors and pan-India in compliance with the anti-sexual harassment law in India, along with compliance and research and understanding of various other gender-based laws, such as maternity health benefit, domestic violence, transgender, POCSO, and connected laws. As an organization who is compassionate about issues pertaining to gender diversity and inclusion, we believe that merely reading news reports or feeling sorry and not really doing anything solution-oriented would be a disservice. This panel discussion is a small but significant step in deliberating solutions. In today's panel discussion, we will be having a holistic and a multi-dimensional discussion about this issue through the diverse backgrounds that the esteemed panelists belong to. I am extremely delighted to introduce today's esteemed panelists. Now, to lend more clarity on definition and what exactly constitutes domestic violence as per law, as well as where could victim call out or how report domestic violence during the lockdown and otherwise, we have advocate Nausheen Yusuf. So welcome Nausheen. Nausheen is an advocate and human rights activist at Majlis since 14 years. Her practice area is matrimonial litigation and domestic violence up to the High Court. She has conducted capacity building programs for various state and non-state stakeholders, that is the judiciary, police, protection officers, legal aid, NGOs, college students, community at large, along with sessions under the anti-sexual harassment law of various purposes. All right. So another point that comes across is, since it is crucial to understand about some key psychological aspects and nuances of intimate partner violence, which will help in identifying, dealing, and even preventing abuse. To help us simplify this same, we also have Smriti Makkar Midha. Smriti is a psychotherapist and also a partner at Posh at Work. Along with being an integral part of Posh at Work, she's a trained and practicing psychotherapist with over 3,500 hours of counseling experience working with diverse adult population on the entire spectrum of emotional, behavioral, and mental health concerns. Her research has been on emotional abuse in significant relationships and sexual harassment at the workplace. She has extensive experience of working with middle and senior management of a multitude of organizations and has conducted over 500 work-life seminars focused on topical areas of personal professional development, along with awareness capacity building sessions on sexual harassment. Thank you, Smriti, for joining in. Anyone, and you'll agree with me that anyone and everyone is susceptible to domestic violence, irrespective of whatever education or income background you belong to. It is also not restricted to the four walls of a household anymore. Its terrible effects and after effects can spill over in your workplaces and your performances as well. To address these issues and concerns and solutions that organizations and employees have to be aware of during the lockdown and otherwise, we have Natasha here. Natasha has been a part of Cognizant since 2015, started as Senior Manager for Learning and Development Digital Operations, and is currently the India lead for diversity and inclusion. Natasha is a pioneer in her field, having 2 decades of work experience with organizations such as G Capital, WNS, Barclays, and Accenture. An MBA graduate from Accelerate, along with various other certifications such as MBTI. Her areas of expertise includes, but is not limited to, training, leadership, behavior, diversity, and inclusion. Welcome, Natasha. To provide views and insights about the role and challenges that HR of an organization have to face while dealing with domestic violence, we have Chetna Malviya. So Chetna is a seasoned HR specialist with 23 years of rich experience across various HR domains, including talent acquisition, talent management and development, labor, and employee relations. She has been associated with Edelweiss for over a decade and has spearheaded various leadership impact roles in her capacity as an HR. Handles 2 portfolios, HR Head for Corporate Functions and HR Employee Relations at group level. As Head of Employee Relations, Chetna is custodian of group policies like POSH, Whistleblower, Code of Conduct, and oversees people risk and people compliance across the group. Now, we all are aware that the effects of domestic violence are across nations, cultures, communities, and even across genders. Also, to gain insights as to how are various nations coping and dealing with domestic violence and how can we learn from each other's experience along with other perspectives, we have Dr. F.F. Ben Mansour. She's a French Tunisian and is multilingual and can work in French, Arabic, English, reads Spanish, and Italian. She is an attorney in law and her practices focuses on public international law, European law, international investment arbitration, and commercial arbitration. She's also an arbitrator and is a member of the ICC Tunisia. She has also been a teaching researcher at Paris and completed her doctorate in public international law with honors in 2009. Also an arbitral woman board director since June 2018. Welcome, FF. And welcome, Chetna, as well. All right, so this panel discussion for all the participants who joined in, thank you so much, firstly, will last for 60 to 75 minutes. And if time permits, we will be taking questions from the audience in the last 15 minutes. All the participants have been put on mute, but we would like you to engage with the panelists to chat. Please leave your thoughts, comments, questions for the panelists during the discussion on chat. Our team will collate the questions and comments and post to the concerned panelists post the discussion. There is also an option where you can also post a chat to a certain particular host as well. In case we're running short of time, we will respond to questions on mail and share it with everyone. For this, we would like you to share your email ID in the form that will be shared towards the end of the panel discussion. Lastly, please note that all panelists' views are their own and based on their expertise and are not to cause any prejudice, harm to any individual or organization. Also apologizing in advance in case there are any unavoidable technical glitches. All right, so let's get to it. So my first question would be to Nausheen. Nausheen, can you please explain exactly what is domestic violence? Now we have a specific law in the country, which is the Domestic Violence Law of 2005. What does it really, what the definition, what is the scope and definition of the definition as per the law? And in your experience, have you seen any increase in number of the cases during the lockdown? Is there any specific form that you've seen has gone up, a specific type of domestic violence in your experience which has gone up as per your observation?
Thank you so much, Sana. Thank you so much for organizing this webinar because this is so important. Coming to the point directly, I would just like to clarify that domestic violence is different from intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence is domestic violence, okay? But then it doesn't mean that all kinds of domestic violence are intimate partner violence. What we understand basically as domestic violence is that, okay, the husband will be beating up his wife, or there will be some kind of harassment from a living partner or probably a boyfriend or something like that. But But domestic violence encompasses violence in domestic sphere. It could be by anybody in the family. It could be by a father to his daughter. It could be by a brother. It could be by an uncle. It could be by anybody in the domestic sphere. The problem over here is in India, and even which I have noticed while I was delivering my trainings to the judiciary, that people understand matrimonial violence or intimate partner violence. But when it comes to domestic violence in the other spheres of life like father abusing his daughter, etc., people don't understand that, including the judiciary. They would be very much, inhibited by the thought that how could a father probably beat up his daughter? Because probably they are presuming themselves to be that particular father at his place. So that is a major issue with regards to domestic violence. Though the law, that is Domestic Violence Act 2005, encompasses all these relationships, okay? Cutting across not only the intimate partner violence, but everything. But the problem is that the people at the executing level do not understand that. But of late, we started realizing that there could be a lot of sexual violence perpetrated in these relationships. For example, we've got rape cases by the fathers or by the brothers or by the uncles. And we have a separate law, covering that. We've got Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, we've got the rape law at its place. But anyways, I wouldn't cover that because we are particularly talking about this kind of violence. But this in domestic sphere would obviously mean that yes, it is domestic violence as well. I would also like to clarify that there is a confusion. People understand domestic violence only as physical violence. They do not understand other forms of violence at all. And the law luckily encompasses other forms of violence. It understands sexual violence, economic violence. It understands, anything that could be pertaining to violence, mental, emotional, verbal abuse, etc. Unfortunately, the lawyers also do not understand that. What they try to figure out most of the time is physical violence. But anyways, people have started, looking at mental violence as well. I see a lot of cases of mental violence is taking place in a very subtle way, which probably we ourselves don't understand. As Sana said, that probably all of us have been victims of violence and probably we don't know that we've been victims of violence. For example, in COVID lockdown, we've seen most of the household chores which have been done by the women in the families. We don't see any help coming in from the men from the families. Probably men would be attending to television or probably playing out with kids, but not helping out their wives despite knowing that they're totally alone. I feel this is a kind of violence as well, and we need to question ourselves on this. The other issue is with regards to mental violence as, there is something called as economic violence as well. So we understand physical violence, we understand mental violence, that probably there is a threat of, being dispossessed from the house during lockdown. Or probably that, I will give you divorce or talaq, because there are a lot of confusions with regards to talaq also. But what we don't understand that there is a huge chunk of women who are suffering from economic abuse, who have probably filed their petitions in the court asking for maintenance orders. And all these petitions have come down to a standstill. They're deserted by their husbands. Probably they've secured orders, but how do you execute the orders? Because it is so difficult now to execute the orders as well. Because the executive agency is probably just falling down. A lot of police officers are getting coronavirus. So how do you look at these women who are deserted by their husbands and who are facing continuous economic abuse? As I mentioned, the courts have come to a standstill. But despite that, the court is taking urgent matters pertaining to criminal cases like remand or NDPS. Okay. But when it comes to domestic violence, probably the courts would feel that this is the last thing that they should look into. And this is the most unfortunate thing to happen. And we have seen all the time that whenever we are faced with a situation of crisis, women's rights always takes a back seat. We are the least in priority, cutting across every place, country, religion, etc. We are the last ones who are looked into. And this is something which is of immense concern. So tomorrow when the courts open and I probably go, to execute the orders of maintenance which has been passed for a woman and she really needs it. It is equally urgent and as important as a woman who is facing physical violence. But probably the courts, I wonder how much would they understand. And you never know what kind of defenses the husbands would come in. That probably I've lost my job.
Yes.
So they might probably file for modification orders. And these are the challenges which we would be facing in the coming times. And this is really a matter of concern. So if you look at domestic violence, as I mentioned, it is anything in the domestic sphere. perpetrated by the violators in the domestic sphere. And it is not only physical violence but also other kinds of violence. And Domestic
Right.
Violence Act 2005 covers it all.
Right.
But this act has a lot of stakeholders. We've got not only the police, we've got the judges, we've got the legal aid, we've got the shelter homes, we've got the medical. People are not aware about the fact that in case if a woman is abused, the last option that she would resort to would be court. But the first thing she would probably resort to would go to a government hospital because she wouldn't have money to get to get a treatment done. And it is these doctors and it is incumbent amongst them that they are supposed to take a medical legal certificate MLC. Not only that, but also fill up her DIR forms, that is domestic incident report forms, under the Domestic Violence Act. The problem is that the doctors are not aware about it. There have been a lot of trainings which have been conducted for the police officers, judiciary, legal aid. We've also tried to get into the arena of doctors, but there is a lot of resistance. Somehow they understand sexual violence. They interfere in rape cases, POCSO cases, but when it comes to domestic violence, I really feel that is the lacuna that we should try to fill up through these films. So there are a lot of stakeholders under this act, and the primary stakeholder under this act is the protection officer. He is somebody he or she is somebody who's totally the central focus of the entire act. If a woman is being troubled, she can go to each of the stakeholders directly. If she is thrown out of the house, she can go to the shelter home. If she needs medical aid, she can go to the doctor. And in case if she feels that she cannot go by herself, she needs some kind of a support system, which she's not getting from her family, then she can obviously approach the protection officer. The idea is this protection officer will put her onto all these services which are available under the law, including filing a case for her under Domestic Violence Act, including getting her a legal aid lawyer. Okay.
So Nausheen, sorry to cut you, but before you get into that, there's also something coming out in terms of disturbance. Is that the case for all the panelists as well? Are you able to hear Nausheen now? I think there is somebody on requesting for a lot of disturbance. Part of having web panel discussions, I guess. So yes. So I think there's a disturbance from Nausheen's end. I think the mic is not that clear, but I think we'll have to make do because of the network issue. I can hear you clearly, Nausheen. And also just wanted to understand, and I will be discussing about the protection officers and all of that. Thank you for sharing that. It gives a lot of perspective. Just wanted to understand now in your experience, because of the lockdown, and it can be your private practice or practice what you're doing at much less. Is there any surge in the amount of cases that are coming to you? Is there any specific form of domestic violence which is reported the most? It can be physical, it can be mental, psychological, and there are so many aspects to it. Is there any specific form which is coming out and which is very predominant in the reporting?
So we are getting almost around 3 to 4 cases a day, which has been the scenario even previously. A lot many cases, I would say, have come to check out on their legal rights. Okay, right now I'm in a lockdown. This is the kind of violence I'm suffering from, but I just wish to know about my rights because after the lockdown is over, probably I would like to take an action on it. Okay, there are certain cases which are of physical violence as well, wherein we have helped out these women, to get in touch with the police officers. We've got this number called as 100. Okay, but we've seen a lot many times the 100 is not getting responsive. Then we basically, try, getting in touch with the officers of this particular police station by getting onto the Google website. I just want to inform everybody that there is something called as police officers list, which is available on Google. You will get all the police officers' name, senior officers' name on that particular website. Please log on to it. It's a wonderful website. You will get the DCP and ACP's number as well. So we've been coordinating with them, so that these women get in touch with them, and the response has been quite decent. Okay, we've got a lot many NGOs also who are providing this kind of help. So but I feel the problem is that we are reaching out only to the literate middle class women. We are not reaching out to the lower class women wherein this is really needed. So if you look at these helpline numbers which are circulated on WhatsApp of 10 number of NGOs, if you look at 100 and all these numbers, it's basically the middle class women who are able to access it. What about the women living in the slums or in the chawls? And how do these women access it? Because most of the time these numbers are so big, they're 10-digit numbers. How do you expect a woman to memorize it? I also feel somewhere down the line the state has not been able to reach out to these women at all. For example, if I get a call, if I make a call, every time I get a caller tune talking about coronavirus and the health hazards, I wish the state would have been serious enough to put a caller tune with regards to domestic violence also also as a health hazard, and this is the emergency number that you need to contact. Or I would have been happy if there could have been an announcement coming in from the authorities like the PM or the CM that listen, don't get into domestic violence. If you do get
Noshi, that's an interesting point. I think I would want to hear more on it also later, because we will be discussing at length about the options and legal options available, and we'll be coming back to you for specific details on that. But I would just want to sort of elaborate right now and put it open to the other panelists, and especially talking about the types of domestic violence you spoke about, Noshi, because I think that's also a very important aspect to understand. In my practice also, there are women coming up to me and saying, if my husband is slapping me, it's right to do that, or it's maybe probably an expression of love. They will not even talk about it, and statistics show of various types that they will not forget reporting. They will not even mention it to the immediate family, right? So that has been a cause for concerns where women just don't talk about it. Why? And I would like to bring Smriti here, and I would like to understand, like, what exactly are the barriers that women face in reporting or even just talking about domestic violence, because that's the most important discussion. Or that's also an important part of the discussion, because a lot of times the reported ones we know, but what about the ones that people have not spoken to and spoken about for so many years?
It is very common. So thank you, Sana, for the question. And I think I'm going to take it forward from what even Noshi was talking about. People don't even realize that they are getting abused or they're experiencing abuse, and especially in relationship which is not in the intimate partner violence. The fact that, I'm maybe getting abused or violated by my father or by my mother. And the impact is, and sometimes the realization has happened in therapy sessions, when they're about 30, 40 years old, and they've been experiencing this abuse for such a long time. So one is lack of awareness, and also, like Noshi mentioned, that people always have this idea that violence or abuse is limited to physical abuse. Often what goes unnoticed is the emotional abuse that happens, and even the verbal abuse. If someone is using now these slangs as well, or belittling the other person, ridiculing the other person, people will come back and say, I'm just motivating you, giving you feedback. If I won't give it to you as a parent, then who would? Right? And they really carry that trauma as well back into the adulthood, and also experience a lot of low self-esteem. Their morale is very low, erodes them completely of self-confidence. When you talk, so one is about lack of awareness, and the other is also denial. The fact that they are my parents, or he or she, they are my siblings, or they are my partners, right? I mean, I love them. They're supposed to love me back. Can they really be abusing me? Right? So even the idea itself of being violated by someone of like a significant other is very scary. And so they also go into denial as well. And often there's a rationalization that you need to have, because it's just so unsettling to even think that my parents, my partner, my siblings could abuse me. I start rationalizing their behaviors. Like Nosheen also mentioned, it could be stress at work right now. It could be job insecurity. They're just frustrated right now. They're having a tough time. There's economic distress that they're experiencing. There's job insecurity right now. And if you look at lower strata as well, a lot of issues have come up that they don't have access to alcohol and substances. So it could be a sign of withdrawal symptoms right now. It's not me. And they start rationalizing their behaviors. Also, there's a lot of shame associated with it. Because a lot of people think, if you look at the abusive patterns, the abusers will often tend to make you feel, you are the one who is pushing me to this extent right now. Only if you had perhaps answered my call, I wouldn't have hit you. It was you, because you didn't answer my call, I had to resort to this. You were talking to someone else, and I love you so much. That's why I had to, hit you, or, call you names and call you a whore or a slut, or so on and so forth, because it's coming from a place of love. So there's a lot of shame associated with it as well. And people think, perhaps, I'm the one to be blamed for these behaviors, and people don't speak up. And, I need to amend my behaviors. Also, there's also a lot of inconsistency. It's not that someone who is being abused will be getting abused every single day, or it will be happening every single minute of the day as well. There are these, it's not like, there's a pattern that comes in. There's going to abuse that's going to happen. It's going to be followed by like, I'm sorry, this won't get repeated. And what happens between these episodes gives them hope. Perhaps, this is the last time. This will not happen again. If I change my behaviors, I can make things better right now. So what really happens between these episodes of abuse is what makes people stay on in the marriage as well. in that hope, and you want to hold on to the hope, right? I want to be a part of a family. Everyone has romanticized this idea as well, and I want to be part of the intact family as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, when you look at it as well, how the socialization, who are the good girls, who are the good women who maintain relationships. So if you're calling it out, you're not maintaining a relationship, you're moving away from the idea, which is also very paradoxical, right? And then people's going to say, no, if you've been abused, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you call it out? Why didn't you walk out? But has this been the ideas that have been given also to women, really empowering them with these decisions? Also, along with that is also the loss in decision making. When you look at abuse, like we're talking about psychological abuse, mental abuse, one thing is also eroding them of their self-esteem, their decision making powers. So for them to even to have the emotional strength to really stand up becomes very difficult. Also, Noshi was talking about economic abuse as well, it's very predominant. So when you look at abuse as well, it's all about power and control that we talk about. So even if you have your working woman as well, give the money to my mother. If you do not give this hand over the salary, you're not respecting my mother. So it's not, and that's a sign of abuse. But again, what's happening right now, do I really have the resources to walk out? If I have to walk out, where will I go? I have no money in my bank account. I have no shelter. Every time my parents would call this, why are you talking to your mother? Why don't you attend to the work at home, especially during lockdown right now? Yeah. So they also start making you move away from your social support systems as well, isolating you completely. So then if I have to reach out also, who do I reach out to? And once they do, and the idea that people are not going to believe me, because when you look at the perpetrators and abusers also, they have a very charismatic personality. They're seen as someone who's really kind, being someone who will not maybe even hurt an ant as well. And then I know people have that perception. So when I see this person is abusing me, will I even be heard? And this is also the message that's being reinforced by the abuser every single day, that you will not be heard. Yeah.
So Smriti, would it be right for me to say that the kind of effects that it has on a victim of domestic violence is multifold and is varied and layered as well.
Very much, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that is the reason why not it takes time for the survivor herself or himself, and I'm using the word gender, it's not gender specific, so we'll be leading to that as well during the panel discussion, but it is the survivor's experience, and only that person can understand. And what that person goes on, it's not something that anybody else could maybe even fathom. Is that right when I say it?
Absolutely. And even one person's experience of abuse will be very different from the other person's experience of abuse.
Yeah. So that brings me to another question, and when you're talking about impact, and there could be a possible spillover. And I'd like to get in Chetna over here, since she has been into the HR space. And Chetna, this kind of violence does spill over to the workplaces. Or certainly if I am abused at home in whatever manner, be it physical, psychological, mentally, emotionally, economically, like Noshi mentioned, you can't rule out the possibility that it is going to be affecting my work performance and the workplace as well. What kind of support do you think organizations need to provide in such a situation, Jay?
So, Sana, and it's very interesting because, there are so many kinds of abuse. So one is that for the person to be able to understand that they are going through this kind of, abuse in the form of violence, and then sometimes people don't even understand that. When we look at stats and when you look at some of the numbers regarding productivity and how such abuse or domestic violence affects women, and especially women who are employed, because research says that employed women are at a 2.4 times more risk of experiencing domestic violence compared to homemakers, because a lot of time they're endangering the male supremacy by exhibiting a better career or social status. So and there are a lot of people who come, and this domestic violence is basically what? Somebody trying to attempt to dominate you and to be able to control you. Okay, so what you experience at home can get manifested in very, very different ways at the workplace. It can get manifested as anger. It can manifest as perpetrating a similar kind of harassment on somebody else. pressurizing or threatening other people. And it also can manifest as people not being able to hold their own, right? So it can manifest in multiple ways, and when it manifests, you really don't know, because this is such an intimate thing that people are not comfortable sharing it. Okay, so there are very, very few instances where and I've seen some such instances, where people have, you can make out that there are signs of physical abuse, because all the other abuse you really don't know. You can't make out that there's no visible signs, but physical abuse, and you don't know as a colleague. Even as an HR person, you really don't know, because the life is so private. For a personal life is a space where do you want to be able to get in. So personally, once, and I was very concerned, because I could see, I could see the marks of physical violence, and I asked the person, and the person said, "No, absolutely, there is nothing," and it was so visible. So you really don't know. So you're not, there are lots of boundaries. But yes, what also gets manifest is that there is a huge impact on their productivity. So we actually, there were a couple of cases, and there was one, I remember only one other case, where a lady did reach out and say that she's experiencing domestic violence, and we really, wondered how we could support that person. And that is the time when we were also building a program, around respect, around care, across the organization. So we could only, bring respect and care and, awareness around it. And so we built some bit of this also into it. But that said, what we have seen, so while we don't have really a policy around it, because we've not had many cases of where people have reported domestic violence. But what we generally look at is that if people require a different shift timing, just so that they can be supported, either because they need to look after their children at a particular time, or if they need to go for a medical appointment, or sometimes you even have court dates, and so that kind of support. So if they require those kind of days, then we do give that. Also, a lot of them come back and talk about privacy and confidentiality. People don't want to really share the trauma that they are going through. And sometimes, there's also a fear that some of this topic can also become, it can become gossip. So you have to be very, very careful around that. So if they reach out to, so the HR people are specifically sensitized around these. And obviously all the time with the employees saying that you're always there. Okay, so you're standing for them.
Sure. Giving them an assurance that somebody is around, somebody understands you.
Yeah,
that's very helpful, Chetna. Yes.
Yeah, and also if we see, so sometimes these sometimes domestic violence also spills over on the workplace. So I've seen one instance where there was this employee that I knew of, and you could see that there was somebody talking to her, and she was visibly agitated, and she's crying, and so offering support, offering counseling. But to my experience, people don't want to really share it at the workplace. That's my experience. But
interesting you mentioned that, Chetna. But we ran a poll when we had launched this particular panel discussion. We did launch a poll, and 99% of the people agreed, men and women both, that any form of domestic violence at home directly affects the productivity and performance at the workplace. And so my next question, and building on that, what Chetna mentioned, and bringing another perspective to it. Natasha, work and business models are changing now. You're not working from home, but at home working. Personal spaces and workspaces have intertwined to a great extent. And now this may extend even post the lockdown. And do you think that it's high time that organizations need to have specific policies or processes to recognize and redress? And I'd also like you to build on the point of, about the privacy of the parties that Chetna mentioned. I think that's an important point considering the change in the structure and the way workplaces are perceived right now.
Sure. Sure. So I'll start with something very simple, right? Every time there is any sort of trouble that we are in or we are upset about something, what do? We try to go to a safe place, right? And for most people, the ideal scenario is the safe place is home. What happens to people who are being domestically abused is they are being abused in their safe place. There cannot be anything more ironical than that, right? And like you said, Sana, not just at this time, but I think right now it's coming out more in the upfront when everybody can see it. But workspaces have been virtual for a very long time. And that's what we've been talking about in our office and in other discussions that we've been having, that it's not a new piece of information that it's a virtual workspace. In fact, many organizations have completely virtual teams. But what I mean by virtual is not necessarily in the same city, but different offices. It could be different cities. It could be different geographies as well. Right? That's a virtual workspace. It's not something new. But yes, you see it as something new specifically because with the lockdown, it's now staring at everybody's face that it's a workspace, people are working virtually and so on and so forth. Now, the very thread and DNA of your policies and procedures in an organization come hugely from a statute requirement that each state or country has, right? Most of these statute requirements they have, if I may say, the outer bandwidth of what should be looked at in a scenario. Practically, any law cannot cover every possible situation, right? It cannot be an exhaustive list saying there's nothing else beyond this that can happen, correct? Absolutely. So from a law perspective, you're saying that anything that happens around a workspace or in the workspace, specifically in the workspace, is something that the organization needs to take care of. Now, my question is that right now, your home is your workspace. Your home is supposed to be that safe haven, but in many cases, it's not. And that is what brings us to a thought that shouldn't organizations then look at domestic violence as a part of their policies? The response you get from most organizations is, hey, legally, statute requirements, I'm not supposed to do anything. And it's very private. Now, let me ask you something. If it was a client who was giving you less money in comparison to anybody else, would it be private for you? If your employees were leaving your organization at higher numbers, would it be private for you? Or if you see somebody coming into the office with a really sad demeanor, upset demeanor, underconfident demeanor, would that be a private matter for you? That's exactly what domestic violence does to all of us. It reduces your productivity, reduces your retention, increases the healthcare cost for your people, increases the absenteeism in your office to an extent that people who only understand numbers, because most initiatives in organizations are driven by what's the ROI and how do you show me the numbers, right? So even if you look at numbers, you're losing employees. That means you're rehiring new ones, you're retraining them, you're giving them time to come up the learning curve, so they're not billable as soon as they join you. That's the amount of money you're losing when you are losing somebody who was working perfectly well in your organization, but had a scenario that you thought was too private to manage and you couldn't control it, right? So my question to you is, why does it need to be a private matter? And secondly, why, look at the irony. On the panel as well, we have all women today, right? So look at the irony. That's exactly what most organizations do. We are looking at all our laws from only one perspective. Most laws we believe are lopsided because most laws favor the women. What we don't necessarily do is look at why is that the case, right? When we say, hey, for example, domestic violence laws, it says victim can only be a woman. Dowry, victim can be only a woman, for example. You look at POSH, only women. But my question to you is, in many organizations that I know of personally, there are, of course, certain requirements you have to stick to, but the organizations have gone beyond the statute requirements where you say, hey, in my anti-harassment policy or in my code of conduct policy, I'm going to add these pieces where I'm saying, irrespective of your gender, if you've been harassed, you let us know, we are here to support you. If there is something bothering you, you come here, we are here to support you. We have employee assistance services available, EAP plans are there, counseling is available. And there is, I think, a huge thing most organizations need to work with is the workplace stigma. that is attached to anybody who's probably been a victim of domestic violence, a victim of rape, a survivor, or anything of that sort, right? In spite of the fact that there is, and I know that came up with my discussion with Sana the other day, there is a DOPD requirement that says if you have been proven guilty in a case of domestic violence or abuse, the organization has the right to take action against you. But because it's not a law or a mandate, most organizations don't. Right?
Exactly.
All of this is driven by the gender stereotypes, right? How many men do you see who feel comfortable coming back and saying, hey, my perpetrator is a woman? And they'll say, oh, come on, grow up there, be a man, right? But is that the case? Why? And then, you know, like you experts have already mentioned that domestic violence is not always physical. It certainly can be a part of it. But there are many relationships where women are equally violent as much as men. Absolutely. And there are many domestic violence abuse cases that you may have heard of or come across where there is so much psychological pressure on the man that he is being abused. But most men don't wish to come out and say it.
Interesting you mentioned that, Natasha, and I will be taking more points from you as well about the gender neutrality and the fluidity of violence, which is unfortunately very prevalent and is picking on. And just one more disclaimer, since you mentioned it has only women, it was not intentional but purely coincidental. We did approach.
Absolutely. I understand.
So it was not the intention of Portrait Work to do that. And we believe in gender neutrality, and as you all know,
I understand.
Yeah. Of that. But I think I'd like to also understand, you made a very important point, Natasha, that, you know, there is no statute responsibility, there's no law in place in our country that, you know, puts certain responsibility or onus, like the POSH law, it has certain responsibility and compliance requirements, right, in India. That's not the case with domestic violence, and it's equally, if not more prevalent. So I'd like to bring in FF here, and FF, if you can just come in and take us through briefly as to, is there any statutory obligation in any other countries that you'd like to point out that, you know, which stood out for you? And since I know it's public international law is a huge space, but it'd be very helpful if you could just point out and highlight certain interesting statutory obligations or legal obligations that countries have put on organizations to deal and mitigate domestic violence.
My answer will be also from the public international law point of view. The truth is, I do not have an example in mind, but what is important, and I want to point out, is recently, last year in 2019, the International Labour Organization, which is one of the oldest international organizations in place, adopted a convention, the C-190, on violence and harassment. And in this preamble, the preamble of the convention, and here I'm quoting, they are saying nothing that domestic violence can affect, noting that domestic violence can affect employment, productivity, and health and safety, and that governments, employers, and workers' organizations and labor market institutions can help as part of other measures to recognize, respond to, and address the impacts of domestic violence. So I'm pointing this to show you that it is a concern also in international organizations, and they are trying to change the mentality and make everyone, individuals and organizations, aware of the fact that they can do something in the workplace. And to complete this convention, which is not in force yet, they also adopted a recommendation, number 260, which is quite interesting, because in this recommendation they have included a paragraph where they ask the members of the international organization, which are not only states but also labor organizations, to promote the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining at all levels as a means of preventing and addressing violence and harassment, and to the extent possible, mitigating the impact of domestic violence in the world of work. And then they propose a list of kind of measures that can be taken in the workplace. I'm sure Natasha, you will find that they are not sufficient, but they are quite interesting. And it's also a way to change the world, to put words and express them. So they are saying, for example, those measures could include, for example, leave for victims of domestic violence. I mean, the employer can provide and accept a special leave for that victim of domestic violence, flexible work arrangements and protection for victims of domestic violence, temporary protection against dismissal for victims of domestic violence as appropriate, except, and this is normal, on grounds unrelated to domestic violence and their consequences. And we have three other elements. Just, I wanted to point this as a follow-up on your intervention, just to let you know that there are some stones put in the international level, and we hope that states will ratify this convention and that we will have more publicity on this convention, and make them aware of what we can do in the workplace. I mean, this issue of domestic violence, whether it touches women or men or children, I mean, it doesn't have any frontier, and it is a question of, it is a concern for every individual and not only states. And when I'm saying individual, I mean, I'm saying also your colleague at work, etc. And so we need this change in the mentality. And when I'm listening to you, I fully, I mean, hearing the same that we hear here in Paris, meaning the same challenges. We are not in the same place, it's not the same time zone, and we are facing the same issues. People don't want to talk about it. They don't feel comfortable. They need to feel safe when they go to someone to tell, and they don't know. So we need to always advertise and let them know what are the possibilities, what the doors that are open to them.
Absolutely. If I'd just like to add to that, Sana, if I may. While I said that I realize and I see that most laws in India seem to be lopsided to people, what I missed out on saying earlier was that there is a very strong reason for that, right? Whenever we are looking at creating a leveled playing field for anybody, right? So if you look at women globally and specifically India, women are the underrepresented community. Right. And when we are looking at that community, we are saying that there is some kind of leverage you will need to give to them so they can start getting to the point where there is a level playing field. Even by the leverage they get through the laws, it is still not where they need to be. Right. And I am also very careful and cognizant of the fact that because of the same leverage, there are situations where the laws are misused. But like we all agree and understand that you cannot fill in every gap in a boat before it starts to run. So there will still be some situations where we see that there are loopholes because a law can, in my opinion, never be exhaustive. Having said that, the need of the leverage that's been given to women across various gender laws in India was definitely the need of the hour. Now, if you look at what's happening recently, like, in workspaces, people are using gender neutral language in their policies, in their laws. And there was a point in time, everything was a he. The candidate should do this and he should have so-and-so as qualities. But today we've come to a time where we see policies are changing, job descriptions are changing. And I only dream and wish that tomorrow we'll be at a point where the laws in India and other countries will also start changing from a gender neutral perspective, right? And I know that in various countries we have laws where there are job employments available for women. Women are available, they are eligible for unemployment benefits if they've lost their job because of domestic abuse and violence. So we hope and pray that we get to a point where we don't need to have that benefit, right? And that was my intent of saying it.
And I think, taking FF's point, and Natasha, what you mentioned about the laws in place, right? Where we are talking about the law which should imposing some kind of obligation on the organization, which is also fair in a way. But putting the onus entirely on organizations would also not be fair in a manner. So what are the challenges that women who want to call it out, who want to report? And I had cut short Nausheen initially, and I would like her, to bring her in at this point in time, to explain to us. And you were mentioning, Nausheen, about the points where police machinery is overburdened, the courts are not working on prioritizing in a fashion when they are working virtually. in a way that women, issues are not really dealt with or not prioritized as much as they should be. And you have started talking about certain suggestions for the college tune. If you can just elaborate as to what is the existing remedy, the helpline numbers, if you have any, which maybe Majlis is running or any other organization that you're aware of, where can you reach out? And I think that's an important point also, because a lot of people call us and we give them a helpline, but we don't really know whether they're actually helping or not. So it'd be really helpful if you could tell us. Yes, Nausheen, I think you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Divij will have to do that, Sana.
Yes. I think she's unmuted now.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So yes, we've got this particular number called as 100 wherein women can call up. As I mentioned that, because you're the literate people who are attending this particular session, so it's important that you're aware about your rights. Please log on to Mumbai Police website and you'll get all the numbers. It's one of the best ways that you can, actually approach them. Number two is that we've also got Majlis's helpline number, which I would like to share with you all. It's 75067 32641. I'll just put it over here in the chat so that everybody will have a look at it.
Sure, that'll be
It is also, yes, I'll just do it in some time. Also, majlislegal@gmail.com, where you can log on to, and I'll put it up as well. I have also shared a couple of slides with Sana this morning, which had all the important helpline numbers at place, right from the numbers of National Commission for Women, State Women's Commission, a couple of other NGOs all over the country, also the DWCD, that is District Women Child Development Department. So I have sent all those numbers to Sana, and it would be great, Sana, if you could forward it to everybody, because that is like a great bulk of information. I also feel that it's very important that we start supporting women in whatever possible way. So there are a lot of women who are probably not accessible to this particular session. You know as to what the rights are. You know as to what the numbers are. If you hear anybody who's in your neighborhood and who's crying for help, I think it's very important that we stand up for that woman, rather than having the bystanders effect that I'm not important, I'm not even getting into it. It's none of my business in case she is harassed. I feel it's very important that if we stand up for our immediate neighbors and we see that they are suffering from domestic violence. So this is something that is important. I also feel that the state should have been, far more better in taking the initiatives pertaining to women. As I mentioned, there should have been some kind of a statement coming in from the CM or PM of the country saying that, you're not supposed to get into domestic violence and it is an offense. Also, I feel is that the helpline numbers should be working, because 100 has got a lot of issues. That's the reason why we have to log on to Mumbai Police website. See, I feel that, in certain countries, there have been chemists, wherein women could go to the chemist with some red dot and communicate to them that, see, I'm a victim of domestic violence, and they are the ones who would take the initiative in contacting the police. I feel this should have been done in India. So we have ration shops, wherein a lot of illiterate women do go to buy rations or milk products, of the dairy shops on a daily basis. And I feel these, the government should have done something in taking initiatives and getting in touch with them. And that's how we could have. Also, the other issue that I feel is shelter home. So as I mentioned, that in case if you're being abused, one of the options that you have, if your parental family is somewhere far across and you cannot go there, because we have these kind of women as well, you can go to shelter homes. But shelter homes over here in India, particularly in Mumbai, have come up with their own, ideas, that in case if you're a woman and you want to seek shelter over here, you have to get yourself medically examined to a government hospital. You have to get a certificate that you're also suffering from coronavirus. You have to self-quarantine yourself for 14 days and then come and get yourself admitted to the shelter home. I think this is really absurd that women would be suffering. So Majlis had initiated a conversation with the DWCD, and one of the suggestions was that these shelter homes could probably have their own rooms, wherein these women from domestic violence would come and quarantine themselves into those rooms, because I understand shelter homes also have their concerns. That, okay, if I'm taking you, then probably my inmates would be infected if you have coronavirus, But you can come up with these kind of initiatives. We had countries who had literally given up their hotel rooms, etc., so that women could get into these rooms. In fact, Pune had a very good initiative. Rather than women leaving the house, if she is being abused and seeking herself into a shelter home, let men get out of house, and the abusers get out of the house and get themselves into the quarantine stuff, which I think is fantastic.
Okay.
So
Okay. Interesting.
So I feel that there are these initiatives. Also, if you look at the government is huge. We are NGOs. Okay, we can help out the government with the ideas, but ultimately the government has the power to execute, and it has the manpower, woman power, whatever you want. So I spoke to you about the protection officers who are central and focal, to the entire Domestic Violence Act. But if you look at these protection officers, each of these protection officers have a lot of Anganwadis, the women workers under them, and they can use these women workers to probably check out their premises, spaces around them, that in case if there is a victim of domestic violence, she can approach me. There could have been that kind of an awareness that could have been done, that these are the places that women could approach. So we recently, as I mentioned, had a conversation with DWCD, and he mentioned to us that luckily they are doing that. They are using their Anganwadi workers to reach out to the women where it is needed. So
that's really helpful. Yeah.
There should have been all these kinds of initiatives and a lot of awareness, And I feel that this crisis is a big learning for all of us. Now we know how we need to react when we are in a situation of crisis. We should get together all across the world, compile a data of best practices, so that God forbid if there is something again, we know that okay, this is how we need to reach out to women. This is how we need to reach out to the people who need us the most. And we really need to learn optimum utilization of available resources. One of the things that I noticed is that women were abused when their buildings were sealed due to coronavirus. Okay, so rather than contacting the police, going to the police station, calling up 100, why don't you use that particular cop who's right below your building? The police, they could just assign the responsibility to that particular guy who's right below your building, who could come up and say, listen, stop domestic violence. I'm taking a complaint right now. Are you getting me? So we need to make optimum utilization of our available resources. Also, the police has got its own email IDs. So as I told you, Mumbai Police website, they've got their own email IDs of every police station. So if you're a victim of violence, you can write a complaint to them. That see, listen, I'm a victim of violence. But then over here, I had a mixed experience. Maybe they would not look at the complaint, but recently I had a case from Bandra wherein the police ended up at the lady's house and they were like, what the heck is it happening? So that was something very nice, the email was reaching. So
recently even similar thing happened with me, Nausheen, wherein a victim of, I just spoke to her yesterday and she said that she had gone to file a complaint with the police, and after a couple of weeks they even checked on her and said, "Ma'am, are you fine?" They called her up by themselves and said, "Are you fine?" So it's been a mixed approach, and they are very well aware. So I think what you mentioned was very critical. And like Nausheen mentioned about the list and everything, I will be sharing that with all the participants, and you can give your email IDs and we'll be sharing those lists also. You can use it yourself, or you can reach out to people or help other people who are experiencing this. Thank you so much, Nausheen. And the things that Nausheen mentioned about the coding system where you can go to pharmacies if you're a victim rather than spelling it out. That's happening in France. Am I right?
Yes.
And
you're totally right.
Yes,
you're totally right. This is one of the measures that were adopted during this pandemic period. And I mean, the list of phone number or text number that we can use to even complain about domestic violence or declare that there is something happening in the neighborhood is quite long. The same also to find a place to go to, I mean, to live in an urgent matter, for example, and also a number for children, because domestic violence doesn't touch only women. So during this pandemic period, in addition to all the marketing around all the safety measures, we had also, please, if you hear something happening, domestic violence in your neighborhood, call 119. 17 is open 24 hours, seven days per week. And also the lawyers, the attorneys, I mean, we have our own bar who also release a phone number for people to call for advices, but also to help them to reach the police or to go to tribunals. And you know that during the lockdown, the tribunals in France were closed. But the only thing that was possible is to go to for emergency complaint or to get emergency orders to put the perpetrator outside the home, because sometimes this is also a solution, is to get an order from the tribunal to take that person outside the home and leave generally the women and the children in their home without the criminal. So, and as you mentioned earlier, so this chemistry code, the MASK 19. So if you were the victim of domestic violence and you don't have access to the phone, for example, and if you have the opportunity to go to the pharmacy, you could use this code to make that pharmacist understand that you are a victim or that there is an issue in your home, and as they have your address, because when you go to the pharmacy, they have your address on the computer, so they can send it to the police and just say there is an issue in that family. She used the code, and then she can get the help, or he can get the help that person needs. But those numbers were not sufficient at all, because as you mentioned, Sana, in India, we figured out, we faced the same increase of numbers of the domestic violence declared to the police during the during this pandemic period and the lockdown in Paris, or in France, sorry. And as a comparison, I can tell you that the figures I found was an increase of 30% the first week of lockdown. Okay.
All right, so, that's quite sizable.
It's a world issue.
Sure. And you also mentioned FF, and I'd like to also bring in the aspect of a different gender. I think we are discussing women, and because the number of cases against them are quite proportionately higher, that's for sure. But one cannot ignore the intimate partner violence in not just in men, but in other communities and other genders, such as the LGBTQIA community. They already have a stigma attached to them being from that community. They have to deal with that. And now they have to also deal with violence within that fraternity or genders that they're dealing with. Are there any specific laws, FF, internationally, or anything that stood out for you, anything you would like to highlight for the purpose of this panel discussion that you think would be helpful in addressing those concerns and the stigma around abuse from those fraternities?
You're right. There is this unconscious bias that domestic violence touch only women or children, and that there is no domestic violence in between men or between women, or in the family, the uncle again with the niece, or the brother and the sister, etc. And to talk about gender in particular, and homosexual, for example, in the international law, there is no difference, there is no distinction in the text. When you will look to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or any text about human rights, it is really drafted in general wording, and it is totally open and encompasses all gender. The issue is that when the LGBT organizations started to use those texts and to fight for their rights and to ask for the respect of their own rights, security, right to life, etc., some states just replied, yeah, but those texts, those international conventions, they are only addresses only human rights, only men and or women, but not LGBT.
Okay.
No, not at all. And but I mean, this was, for example, the position of the Islamic Conference Organization. I mean, we understand why it is still a question of mentality, but legally speaking, those rights are totally applicable to all the people, all individuals. And in 2011, the Human Rights Commission made a special report to the United Nations General Assembly with respect to those rights, just to remind that taking all the texts one by one and the different articles of those conventions, to remind that those rights are also applicable to LGBTQ.
Sure, the community as well.
I'm just
Absolutely.
searching for the name of the report, but I can send it.
No issues. You can send it later
to
whenever
you.
you
But
do.
it was in 2011, and it was
Okay.
the Human Rights Commission who made this report to the United Nations General Assembly, and it is very interesting because they're taking every right one by one, and they're saying those apply to
Men and
everyone.
women only.
Yes.
Oh, okay, everyone.
discussion.
Okay. All right. That's very interesting to know. And that's very helpful to understand. It's also very encouraging to also know. Since this panel discussion is also not about where we have identified the reasons, we have sort of also evaluated the impact and what measures we can take. I think we should also, since we are, racing against time over here as well, but what can be the preventive measures that one can take? And I'd like to also understand it irrespective of whatever gender you belong to. This is domestic violence for women, for sure. You have specific laws, you have certain helplines where you can go to, we discussed that, but also intimate partner violence for other genders. So, Smriti, if you can just, briefly, in the interest of time as well, and for the purpose and convenience of the, participants, if you can just come in and help us simplify the signs of abuse or certain red flags that one can identify in an intimate partner relationship, so that you prevent, or you are able to mitigate, or just not maybe walk out at the right time if that is an option.
Right. So I think and I'm very glad that if I've also shared in terms of the position that the conventions have taken, and it's more about the human rights and how it's applicable to each person. And it's important to know because in my experience also I've seen that how men have also experienced harassment in both heterosexual and homosexual relationships as well, and the sensitivity around it has been very limited. Where a person, I know one of my clients went to the police station and was said, but I don't see any bruises, so why have you come to the police station right now? Or another client saying that I'm being manipulated every single day by my partner, by my wife. They say that if you do not do things the way I would like it, I'm going to commit suicide. And that's a way of, again, manipulation that does happen. And if you see the numbers also, even in LGBT community and in same-sex relationships, is similar to what women would experience. It's about 1 in 4 that you would exceed. So the reason I'm giving this context right now, because when you're looking at the signs of abuse, it will be the same for each relationship. There will be a couple of them that will be standing out differently when it comes to men, because the stigma associated with it, and maybe for the LGBTQ community, it may be slightly more difficult for them if they have not come out of the families. Right? But otherwise, when you look at the signs and the red flags, it'll be same across these different relationships as well. So I want to just put that context there. And again, I want to reiterate the point that I had made earlier, that when you look at domestic violence, when you look at abuse, it's not so much about conflict. It's more about power and control. So it's about the control tactics that they employ at this point in time. And the primary tactic would be of isolation. Because when you're looking at control, I can only have control over a person when I know the person is alone. Right. So they try to isolate you from all your different resources, your support systems, your families, from work. They might go and create a scene at work as well, spread rumors. So that's the tactic, and even checking on your whereabouts. Keep calling you, keep texting. So to the extent, what, I'll not even call my friends and family, because I know if I get a call waiting, that small thing could also spark off an incident where I could get abused.
Right.
And that's the tactic that they're using to isolate you. Or you're not answering my calls, my call was on call waiting. That means I'm not that important for you. Yeah, and that's how the conversation really happens as well. So constantly checking on the whereabouts, where they are, questioning them, being possessive. And again, this idea that people have, this person, so was actually a very young girl who reached out to me, and she said that she was 19 and a partner, my boyfriend really loves me because he's so possessive about me. That's a red flag. That's not coming from a place of love right now, because love does not try to hold you. Your needs, your desires are respected, and you're not invalidated in the relationship as well. And I think another thing of when you talk about this, the signs, I think understanding the cycle of abuse is very important. Like I was talking about earlier, it's not the episode so much, but what really happens and transpires between the episodes. So there's actually research done in this, and the abuse has been broken down into 4 steps. and 4 phases rather. One is actually tension building. When things are just getting heated up, there'll be slight conversation, and may last for some minutes and even weeks as well, where the abuser will start getting, will start yelling, screaming, why are you pushing me? And people know that this is very small right now, and from their past experience, they will know that if I say something, the person is going to lash out. So if I have to protect myself, I rather stay quiet, and they stay quiet. But then tension begins to build. It's like a pressure cooker, and it's building and building. And then you say, you know what, I'm done with it. I'm going to take a stand for myself. So you muster the courage, you speak up. But now what have you done? You've questioned the control, which is not acceptable, right? And that's when the episode of abuse would happen. It will initially start off with maybe more emotional, verbal abuse, and then move to physical abuse. So and that's when the initial stages people can't even recognize that there are abuses happening, because the person is also saying that I did this because you pushed me. You didn't answer my call. You didn't, talk to my mother respectfully, or the fact that the salt was more in the food, and that has been some incidents as well.
Absolutely.
And you have no use. You're worthless, and that's how the abuse really starts happening.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this can happen across genders. I mean, irrespective. These principles and rules or red flags are applicable in any form of intimate partner violence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And then this would happen.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just trying to control the cycle of abuse here. So there's tension building that's happening. Then the incident happens. Now then the person, and here the person, so earlier person was quiet, now person had spoken up. Now what will happen is now the person will feel remorse. And they actually feel remorse, because I do work with people who have engaged in these abusive behaviors as well. And they honestly feel remorse at that point, and they would apologize at that point in time, shower them with gifts, and say, I'm sure this is not going to happen again. And this is called the reconciliation period right now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then there's a calm period, which is also called the honeymoon period, where the person would apologize, express a lot of love, care, even go for counseling sometimes and therapy. And the person feels, what, I think now there is hope. Perhaps the abuse has ended. This will not get repeated right now. But again, there's some small incidents that start happening. People start finding, the abuser will start finding faults again, start engaging in passive-aggressive behaviors. Then the tension building starts again. And that's the cycle of abuse. So when you look at the signs, people need to also identify if is this just a conflict that's happening, or they're in an abusive relationship, if they can find these patterns of tension building, the incident happening, reconciliation, calm and honeymoon period, and back to tension building
as well. Right. And so, Natasha, that brings me to a very interesting point, like you were mentioning about that how we should not be focusing on a particular gender and the stereotyping that takes place. And we have seen, as we spoke about the cycle of abuse, we've seen that people have started talking about other gender intimate partner violence as well. Do you think that organizations can play a pivotal role in breaking that stereotype and managing the societal perceptions that exist even on the existence of another gender? Forget them facing abuse, right? So what are the steps that organizations can take or should be taking, in your opinion, that can sort of break that stereotype?
Absolutely. I think there is a lot organizations can do, Sana, but if you'd allow, I'd like to pick on something else that Nosheen said a while back. We were talking about initiatives that are run across different states that protect women and help them know that, hey, there is something you can do. And this is what's happening with you, right? In our training sphere, it's usually called as things that, that there's a Johari window set up. And it's created by a psychologist that helps us understand that you may be aware of what's happening, and you know that you're aware. You may be aware of what's not happening, right? And there are 4 quadrants like that, without getting into detail. But there is one quadrant that says that I don't know that I don't know.
Okay.
Right? And which is what a lot of us have said in different ways, that many times I don't even know that this comes under abuse. If 3 times a day you're telling me, come on, I just hate the food you cook, or you're going and telling your husband or any other person in the house that you never earn enough money for the family, that is a form of domestic abuse if that's happening over and over and over. Right? If you're telling a child that you're so stupid, you don't even know this simple concept in your education, you're actually abusing your child. Half the time parents get off with it by saying, if I won't teach the child discipline, then he or she won't understand this. I'm doing it for their good. I don't want to beat you, but you push me to it. right? And all of this really is nothing but the fact that I am finding an excuse to cover behavior with something that I can justify to myself and to the person who's been abused. And there's nothing different in organizations as well, right? Coming directly to your question, in the city of Telangana, state of Telangana, there are, and I know that personally because one of my very close acquaintances is working with the police to make this happen. They have posters put up in the metros. They have put up across the roads, right? You have those poles where they're random posters put up, but they have used very very logical and correct places to put up posters that talk about domestic violence, saying, hey, this is the number you can call, this is what domestic violence means. And sometimes people who can't reach the social media like Facebook, Twitter, hashtag domestic violence, me too, this, that, the other, or education like school or corporate offices or have a safe haven, etc. People who come from economically weaker sections, they can read that, they can understand that. Or sometimes the picture do justice to the number, right? They will make a note of that number. I understand they may not be able to memorize a 10 or 11 digit number, but making a note, knowing that poster is there, I can go pick it up from there, is easy for example, a housemate to do. And I've had instances where the housemates have come to me, somebody said, you know what, he doesn't beat me otherwise, but only when he's drunk. He can't control his emotion at that time. And does that justify the behavior? It doesn't.
Yes.
And it's correlated directly to the corporate environment as well, in that stature where people still assume, sitting at higher positions, people still assume that in corporates where hopefully the economic status of the people who are working there is slightly higher than others, they're assuming that these people can never go through domestic violence because they come from preferably educated families, or they have some exposure, the women are earning for themselves. So it's a fair assumption that they do not get exposed to DV at all. But that is not the case. There have been scenarios, and I'm not going to quote the name of the person or the organization, but the person has come back and said, I'm such a senior person in my company, and I have such a wonderful working relationship with my colleagues. But when I go home, I am a completely different person. I am this meek little child who's sitting in a corner listening to all orders given to me. And I cannot protest. And which is why when I come to work, I feel empowered.
Yes.
So there are two completely different lives.
Yes, I'm completely sort of running out of time as well, but I really would want to take advantage of your experience in the diversity and inclusion space, and put out there about the stereotyping that takes place. How do you think organizations can handle that stereotyping of the LGBTQ community? If somebody, now we have the trans persons bill, where people are coming out and people are mentioning about their orientations and genders, and there are so many genders in the world that we're not even aware.
Right.
So, what is the sensibility like in organizations? What is the awareness about it like? Only when we reach that stage where there's awareness about the existence of these genders will we be able to accept and even fathom that there could be even abuse amongst them.
Absolutely.
Right. So, what is the if you can share your experience about the level of awareness?
Sure, Sana. So there is no hard and fast rule to it. I'd say it's too new. Okay. But what organizations, in my perspective, can do, and I know some of them are doing, is talk about it a lot. Remove the workplace stigma of, if this is a trans person, this person belongs to the LGBTQ community, remove that stigma. Talk about it a lot. Abuse is abuse irrespective of gender or age or nationality. It is abuse. Very simple, right? So whether this person has had to go through an abuse because of a heterosexual relationship, homosexual relationship, or a father and son, or a father and mother and daughter relationship, doesn't matter. It is an abuse and it needs to be taken care of. So there is a great amount of awareness that can be given to people when they join an organization. When you're talking to them about your compliance courses, talk to them about the inclusive policies you have.
Absolutely.
Tell them that, hey, we absolutely stand for people and stand for inclusive policies. We stand against any kind of harassment and bullying. When you talk about that, when you have posters put up, when all your conversations revolve around that, when you show simple signs of I'm an ally, kind of a badge on your shirt or on a book on your desktop, these simple signs of helpfulness convey to the person that, hey, I can come to you and talk to you about it. And this organization has a culture where I'm not going to be asked to shut up, right? So that awareness is very important. And once that's done, I think we need to start talking about it through the leadership. So there needs to be leadership buy-in, wherein you're talking about your job description created for people who come from different sections instead of fitting them into nooks and crannies that you find. right? Be yourself at work. You're saying, hey, you know what, support gender transition surgeries, support medical benefit for LGBTQ, you know, a benefit that my spouse would get, my partner can also get the same benefit. I'm not looking at you to give me a legal document because it's not allowed in India, right? Notice the behavior of people. If you see there's somebody who wants to talk to you and there is a challenge, go have a coffee conversation with them. These are the kind of things that HR executives, DI leaders, even a regular team manager, any sort of a people manager profile, all of these people can have these conversations that hint towards, I'm here to help you, talk to me about anything you want, right? Your policies and procedures need to change along with the systems in the organization. So I'm saying, as an organization, for example, that hey, I'm happy to hire trans people in my company, but does my admission form or my interview form give them the option of saying I'm a third gender? Right? So there needs to be a system that says I'm a trans person or I'm a third gender. I would like to select the gender as a third gender. And if there are people in my organization, for something as simple as a third gender washroom or a gender neutral washroom, how many organizations have that, right? When you're helping people through emotionally stressed situations like gender transitions, etc., talk to people about it. If they're okay to share their names, talk to the organization, pick it up as a case study, discuss it with even your finance and legal department. These are few things that organizations can do.
That's an important point you mentioned, and I'd like to bring in another aspect here, and I'd like to get Chetna in this. Chetna, we are talking about, yes, reporting, calling out, mentioning, including them, hearing them out, which is great. I'd like to flip that question a little bit, Chetna, and given your experience of handling, say, so many various employee grievances over a period of time, say if you receive any information about, say, a case of domestic violence pending against your employee, or an information is received that your employee is an abuser, for example. So practically speaking, to what extent does this information influence the person's roles and responsibilities in that organization?
So there are two scenarios that I hear you talk about, Sana. One is the scenario where you're saying that the person is the victim, right?
So the person is the victim that is there. I mean, that we've spoken of, that there should be policies, protocols, support provided, and those are the do's and the don'ts for them. But what if I'm flipping that question a little bit, Chetna. I'm saying that I'm looking at the other end of the spectrum and saying that if my employee is actually an abuser or a alleged abuser, and if I get some information that this is the case, what does that influence the person's role and responsibilities in our organization, or should it?
So see, we've never had anything like this, but when you talk about it, I think there will be a couple of grapples that you'll have. The first is the validity of the information that's coming in. Okay, so is it alleged? Is it proven? And I would draw your attention to the same, the principles that we have for the POSH Act into this. So until the person is proven guilty, you would treat the person just, like another person. And I think that's one important aspect of it. So the validity of the information. Now, the second thing I would also be very cognizant about if any such thing came in. So it's not only the validity, but also the privacy of the individual. Okay. So, where is that information coming from? Where is it going? Who is holding on to that information? Because sometimes, the person may not be proven guilty. And it's I'm drawing upon the POSH Act, but it can really harm a person's career, personally, professionally,
Sorry,
in every
I
which
think
way.
you're breaking up. Just hold on.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Is it okay? Is it better now, Sana?
Sorry, if I may just interject here. I think you're breaking up.
It's fine. Sana, we can hear her well. Yeah.
Oh, okay, then it's probably my internet connection. Sorry. Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
So where does that information reside, and how will it be used? And I think there are also concerns regarding discrimination, and all of this is before anything has been proven. So I'm just looking at a scenario where somebody is given an information saying that, or a spouse has come in, or a partner has come in saying that, this is what I'm experiencing. And as an organization, then how do I look at the employee? So
Okay.
I'm saying till it's not proven, I would have all of these concerns. And I think we will tread very carefully, just like you tread, and holding that employee's personal and professional dignity, just
Sure.
like you would proceed in a posh case. But definitely, if and as I always say that such things are very prone to gossip, and it is very
Yes.
easy for it to become gossip, and for it to become interesting news around the organization. So so therefore the safety. The second thing is the second part of it maybe, and if we grapple with this and we say that if there is a person against whom an order has been passed, and somebody who is proven guilty. Now let's take that scenario again. We've not had that scenario, but I can speak very well from
Sure.
from knowing what we've done in similar kind of cases. So if the person is proven guilty and has gone through that entire process, and there is a court order against the person, that's my understanding will be the end of it. It's the same thing that would happen to whether you go through the through the sexual harassment case, because this is also harassment. How can you look at it from a different light? Okay,
Sure.
so if the person, and it doesn't matter, organizations are not made up of people, and then we downplay this entire thing of stars. There are no stars. There is nobody who is protected irrespective of their behavior, because people who behave in this kind of manner, it will never be only at home. Some of these aspects will leak out, and especially if that person is in a position of power. I would
Right.
find it very difficult to believe that you really become two different people, one at home and one at the workplace, especially if you are slightly on the aggressive side. So in
Sure.
my mind, I have no qualms about how the organization will take that information and how we will take it forward.
Sure. Okay, that's helpful. So I am really hard pressed for time. So I would like to, ask the panelists, because we have been getting a few questions which are important to be addressed. Is it okay if we extend this by more 10 minutes? Is that an option for all the panelists, or do you all have prior commitments? I can totally understand if you have.
Yes,
So
fine.
then accordingly we'll go ahead.
Fine. 10 minutes.
Yes. So we
Yep,
will not
can do.
extend. Yes, more than 10 minutes. Is it everything okay? Chetna, Natasha, Nausheen?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
absolutely,
Smriti?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So there are certain questions that have been coming in the chat boxes, which I think it'll be interesting for some of the panelists to answer. So one of the question is that how can we sensitize people to differentiate between domestic abuse and what we call using a beating out of love and affection, something that is extremely predominant in India. Very often a beating to set a child straight. How do we address this? So I think we've already mentioned that. So we're talking specifically not of intimate partners, but also children here. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing children, I mean, if anybody, if you would like to take it up, maybe ask Nausheen to take it up. Nausheen, do you have any thoughts if children are abused and beaten up?
I believe we've already answered that particular question, but we've
Sure.
covered that, it could be all kinds of, people who are covered in this. But then, I think this is something what to do with our upbringing, that it's okay to beat up a child. And so people would say it's okay to beat up my wife, and that is a big upbringing issue that we are facing constantly. However,
Yeah.
I would also like to point out that abuse is also, you also have sexual abuse. And in case if it goes to that particular extent, you have POCSO and all the other acts available, where you are mandated to report if a child is
Right.
being abused, otherwise you will be imprisoned in the process. Okay.
Right.
I think the schools are coming up wherein they're teaching the children the good touch and bad touch. I think it's high time we should also teach the children that it's not okay to touch, it's not okay to be violent, nobody has a right to beat you up. And I think maybe if not the home, but at least the schools could take up this particular issue very vigorously. Okay. And anyways, the Indian Penal Code, if I look at it, applies to everybody. Okay. But then what agency does the child have to go to the police station and file a complaint against his parents that, okay, I'm being
Right.
beaten up? Because the police also probably would not understand, and they would try to justify that kind of violence.
Absolutely. Maybe you deserved it. Maybe you did something wrong.
So
Correct.
we need a lot of training, a lot of re-questioning our values and understanding
Absolutely.
things on that aspect. It's a very
Yes.
good question, but
Yeah.
maybe we just need that upgradation.
Okay.
Sana, there's something I'd like to say to that one.
Sure.
Now, there's recently a survey that was launched by UNESCO, and that was given to the adolescents in India, right? And the question was so clear. It said, is wife beating acceptable? The survey was given to boys and girls of the age between 15 to 20. And would you believe a staggering number of 57% boys said it's acceptable, and 53% girls said it's acceptable. Such a high number of girls saying it's okay for women to be beaten up by their husbands. And I think it goes back to the mindless cycle of abuse. If as a child I was abused or I saw abuse and I thought it was okay because nobody stopped it or nobody said it's not all right, I've believed growing up that it's okay. What if my husband gave me 2 jobs? It's all right. No, even my mother got them.
Yes, absolutely.
If I could come in, Sana, with 2 points as well.
Sure.
One is when you're talking about beating up, and they could be, parents could have any kind of reasoning for that, to discipline the child. The idea is that you're still giving that in some context, beating is okay. But the idea that beating up is not okay. There is no excuse that could, or no reason could justify the beating up is okay. That's one point I'm going to bring it, because, if it's telling the child, okay, child today goes and beats up another child, you beat up the child saying, don't beat up the other children. How are you teaching beating? That's one part of it. Second, I think I want to also bring in another psychological aspect of it. What I have seen that children who have witnessed abuse at home, they would hate the person, the parent, or the family member who has engaged in that behavior. But it is also seen that they also resort to similar kind of behaviors in their significant relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
Because when you look at it, those are the things that they have learned. They don't have any other way of knowing how to respond to that anger, that betrayal, that frustration, because that's the only thing they have learned growing up. So,
and they justify it by saying that's my way of expressing it.
Yeah. So beating up is not okay in any context, because you are giving a message.
Sure, that's a very important problem. So how does one build, and that's another question, so how to build the confidence and courage to speak up and speak out? It's by Alan, and he asks that fearful of the imagined implications. So how to build the confidence and courage to speak out? If maybe Smriti or anybody else from the panel would like to take this out.
I think that some tips. So I think again go back to our upbringing as well. Today if the child questions something or says no, I don't want to do it, just shut up and do it, because I say, why should I do it? Because I'm your parent. I'm asking you to do it. Right? So having actually created space for even to have a conversation with the child, where you are asking for the opinion, asking them to stand up if something is not okay. And when you're asking a child also, are we already going the mindset the child has to be compliant to what we're asking? Is there even a space for a no for a child?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I'm asking them, do you want to do this? I want to hear a yes. I don't want to hear a no.
Yeah. And I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb, Sana, if I say this, but I think it is high time for us as women particularly to start saying no. Right? It's been so long that we are saying I'm a woman and I'm a victim. I get that, because there have been many situations where it is the truth, and innumerable situations. I'm not taking that away from any woman who's been abused. Absolutely not. But I'm saying that it's high time we need to start up and saying, not okay, not taking this shit from you or from anybody, because unless you help yourselves, there's only so much the external factors can do.
And I think that answers. Sure.
Sorry, and I want to, also bring in what Afif had mentioned, that it's also about the change in mindset and mentality. Because if today I'm saying a no, how are the other people perceiving it? If you go back to gender stereotypes, if a man says a no, he's being assertive. If a woman says a no, she's being defiant. Right?
So if you are also trying to, sorry, Smriti.
So I'm saying that, it's just not about someone saying a no, but are we also creating the environment which is conducive enough to hear that no as well?
Hear that no as well.
And and I think, like Afif said, the mindset needs to change, the mentality needs to change, the conversations need to change right now.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Afif, you were also trying to make some point, Afif.
Yes, I mean, just as a conclusion, just to say that it is once again all the work of the mothers first. I know that every child in the world has 2 parents, but it's true, and it's still today the case. It is the mother that is very important in the education, because she spends more time with the children, and it is for her to teach the children and to say this situation is not normal. Okay, and you have to learn also to talk for yourself, but also just say this is not normal. auntie has been bitten by her husband. This is not normal, and that's why I'm standing. I'm standing to say no, and they need to see women and men, not, I mean, around them, just standing and saying no. This, I mean, we're not hiding anything. There is something very, very important that happened 2 days ago, or that person was beaten, or etc. And this is not normal, and that's why we're saying no. Okay, and we want you to not stay silent when you're facing such situation, even at school. If you see something, just say it. Just say it. Yeah. Don't be afraid to give your opinion when it is about using violence. Okay, yes. So, and it is the mothers, and I mean, if we don't do it as a mother today, I mean, the child of tomorrow, who will be the adults of tomorrow, they won't change it at all. And I'm saying this because I was raised in a family with Muslim tradition and with all the stereotype that you can know about Muslim and the hierarchy, etc. But I had a grandmother who was standing for every woman who was beaten by a man. And every time she heard that someone was beaten by a man, she was going and seeing that man and saying, "Hey, never again. Never again." And my home is open to the wife, to the sister, to everyone. And I don't want to, I mean, because you have this tradition of the honor, you cannot go and complain about your husband or your brother. This is not good for the reputation of the family, etc. I'm talking about someone who was raised in the 50s, and she was my grandmother, and she taught me this. Even if my mother today, I'm sure, will use the different wording, saying, okay, you know, there are things that we cannot talk about, and we are in 2020. Okay, so it is also our duty as women to teach our children how to behave in the future.
I think on that note, I think that's a brilliant point made, and I think all the ending points made by panelists and of course throughout. Thank you so much, firstly, for putting up with my incessant calls and emails and agreeing to be a part of this important panel discussion. Thank you so much, all the panelists. I can't thank you enough. I know you all are busy in your own, work-life, maintaining your own work-life balances, and you have taken your valuable time out for this one. Thank you means a lot to us. And I just like to end, and I'm sorry if we cannot take all the questions of the participants. Please mail us those questions if you have specific questions for any panelists, we will be mailing them, and they will come back to you within a week.
Sorry, Shivangi, if I can come in.
Yes.
So we've also shared the link of the feedback form, and if you want to drop your queries there as well, that's absolutely fine, and we'll try and revert to each one of them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Shivangi is also co-founder.
Yes, thank you very much, Sana. And I think,
thank you.
I think what's very important, and it's just a wonderful listening on to everybody. But I think we should have these conversations more often. And I think these are uncomfortable conversations to have. When you even open up, and talk about these in the organization or at the home space or anywhere, these are not very comfortable conversations because we don't have them. If we keep just having these conversations more often, we will become more comfortable, and it will just help the cause. It will just make the experience so much better.
Point well taken, Chetna. We completely resonate with that. And that was the idea of starting that conversation. And there are many conversations, but just building on it and searching for solutions. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much.